Everyone, as I said, great to have you on for what will be our final session, our final Power BI for Enviro session for 2025. For those people that are new to the group, big welcome. I'm Christian from DiscoverEI, and we sort of put on these meetups that we try and do each month. And today, our guest speaker, who's going to be talking to us about Power BI visual calculations, is Daniel Marsh-Patrick. Also works with us at DiscoverEI, but runs his own company, Coacervo. And you probably know him as the author and creator of the globally world famous visual Deneb, amongst others. Hey, Daniel. So,
Sure.
yeah.
I definitely do those things. I don't know how world famous it is. It's world famous to me.
I think it's world famous to lots, but anyway, then you can continue being humble. So just bit of a 5 minute intro before we get into the main session. So again, those people that are new, our mission here with the sort of forum that we created of Power BI for Enviros, it's really to share case studies, allow people to learn new tips and tricks, largely in the Power BI space, and really empower all sort of environmental professionals and just general data analysts as well on their Power BI journey. So just some general housekeeping as a courtesy to the speaker, just please mute yourself. There will be many opportunities to ask questions either via the chat or you can come off mute and ask Daniel directly, and we'll do our best to try and answer them as we go. Also, the session is being recorded. You've got little recording signal in the top left of your screens. So we'll make that available via the YouTube channel and the Meetup group blog after the session as well. Before we begin into the main session, I'd just like to acknowledge the Bibbulmun peoples, the traditional owners from the land which I'm dialing in from today. Pay respects to the Whadjuk people, their elders, both past and present, and also extend the acknowledgement to the Indigenous peoples from the lands that you're dialing in from, whether that's from within Australia or across the world, across globally. So, yeah. DiscoverEI, some of the work that we sort of do, Power BI training, Power BI report design, end-to-end, and a bit of graphic design. So our focus is really on data storytelling, largely with environmental and water-based data sets in that sphere. So if you do have any questions, think we could help, please feel free to reach out. But on to the reason that everyone's called in. So welcome to the visual calculations in Power BI. A Christmas miracle. So what we've got is Daniel there. You can see on both your team screen and in the event thumbnail with the cool hat. In this session, Daniel's going to take us through the recently released, still recent, I suppose, visual calculations in Power BI. So he'll use a simple temperature-based data set and explain the basics of this technique and demonstrate some really nice practical use cases where Visual Calcs can be used to replace the often semi-complex DAX statements. And, when you're thinking you're writing complex DAX and you're trying to understand where's the context coming from, am I excluding this, am I including this? And, we all kind of write our DAX and then hope for the best. Visual Calcs may, in some situations that he'll demonstrate, be a nice alternative to those often complex DAX statements. So I might not read all of this, Daniel, but for those people that don't know Daniel, he's worked across both the UK and has been working in New Zealand now for a fair while. He really focuses on helping to drive enterprise-wide solutions through his process and software engineering strengths, predominantly through Power BI and business intelligence, data visualizations, and software integration. He's been a Microsoft Data Platform MVP for 6 years, Daniel?
I think so.
Yeah, about that. And if you don't know him, he's really a big name or like an authority across the custom visual space, largely with lots of custom visuals out there. Deneb, HTML content, originally small multiples, violin plot, these sort of custom visuals that go outside of the standard core visuals in Power BI and allow you to get a little bit more bespoke in your creation. And there's lots of people out there, including Daniel, that are doing some really, really nice things with these visuals. So if you haven't checked him out, have a bit of a look online. He's also a Power BI community super user, and he regularly presents and blogs on a variety of different Power BI subjects. So he's here to share his knowledge about Visual Calcs, what he's discovered so far. And without further ado, mate, I'm happy to stop sharing and handball it over to you, and off you go. So thanks very much, Daniel.
Thanks, Christine, for the intro, and thanks to everybody for having me. Yeah, so we'll talk today a little bit about, well, hopefully a lot about visual calculations and Power BI. In terms of materials, I'm a little ill prepared, for which I apologize. This is going to be more of a talk and show kind of session. Normally, I love to do a slide deck, but I'm just a little backlogged with presentations, and the time of the year that it is always fun to try and get things done before the holidays. But I think it's a really nice feature that we've seen come along to Power BI. I think I personally I do a lot of work in the I'm more of a conventional back-end engineer by sort of my Power BI journey. I'm good with modeling. I'm good with understanding how to transform and clean data, but I do not understand DAX at all, despite what Christian may think, because we work a lot on Power BI projects, and I amble my way through. I understand the structure of data quite well. I understand it when I can see it, when I can feel it. But when I have to kind of imagine how to pull things from this mysterious context that exists in the scope of my model, I still sometimes have a lot of trouble getting my head around that. I'm a very visual person, and therefore visual calculations is quite a nice concept for me. So I will share my screen, and my screen is absolutely fascinating, but hopefully we're going to fill it with some slightly more fascinating things. So I've got a little workbook here, and it's a very, very simple data set, but it's got quite a lot of data in it. So this is a really simple model. And the story of this model is, you can just ignore that. That's Bravo doing its date table work. It's a very simple model. I got a fact table of daily temperature readings for New Zealand. And this is about 700,000 rows worth of data. So we've got one row per day per location. So we've got a few places around New Zealand where we record this information from, and it's basically just average, just an average temperature for the day. And we have a record for that. So it's a lot of data to process, and therefore it's great for something like DAX, because DAX is very, very good at chewing up and aggregating this stuff. But DAX sort of works in the scope of the model, so it's really kind of handy that we can we can take a big table, and let's just double check that there. I'll just quickly, hopefully the zoom works, but we can see down the bottom there we've got 713,000 rows. And the news has come up, which is also very handy. Thanks, Windows. So this is a lot of data to aggregate. We do have a max, min, and average for each day, but we're just going to focus on the average temperature. We just want a measure to play with, that we can sort of see how things work. So, it's pretty easy for me to say grab a line chart. And because line charts only have a number of data points that they can show in terms of what Power BI will do, even though the aggregation is quite good, I've just set my date filter just to something reasonable from like the last 7 years worth of what's there in the data. So, I can pull my date field in, and I've got a simple measure, which is kind of really my mean of means, I suppose. This is the average of my daily temperature readings. So this is a very simple DAX statement, and something DAX does very, very well. So I can add this to my visual, and as we might expect with some seasonal data, we see this really kind of seasonal variation of mean temperature. And with this being the Southern Hemisphere, it's higher in the January, February region. Oh, God, I love that date format. Let's change that. I don't like that. Just use general date. Hopefully that's going to work. That's a little bit better. I can read that now. So we can sort of see this kind of seasonality. Yep. So, January, February, December, kind of a bit warmer, cooler in the winter months here, which are the kind of the Junes, Julys. But we can see that there's a trend. But this is a lot of data for us to chew through. So what we might typically do is we might want to think about, well, a moving average is quite good. That's a way of kind of smoothing out the information that we see. There's a lot of daily change, a lot of variation, even day to day, even though this is an average per day. And, I can think about now, how can I do that? So I then have to put my DAX hat on, and I have to start thinking about, well, I've got my dates and my measures, and then this is my row context, and I may have a filter applied in the context of my slicer or my location. Fortunately, what we want to do is kind of simple in the context of DAX, but we still have to apply some mysterious thought paradigm to that. And this isn't the most complicated of measures, but and actually, before we do it, let's just do a bit of visual formatting. Let's get this line and just maybe make it a little bit smoother, not smoother, but thinner. And we'll just change its color to something a little more muted. just so it's not screaming for attention. So this is our daily value, but it's kind of just pushed to the back a little bit. So hopefully we can start to see what this measure is going to do. So I prepared one earlier because I don't leave anything to chance most of the time. But this is kind of how I need to start thinking about if I want to calculate a rolling average, a moving average. I've put a variable at the top of my DAX statement here where I've said I want to use 30 days as my variable, and that just lets me play with things. Let's just move that down a little bit out of the way. That's probably just going to help us see the results of what we're doing. But then I start having to think about using an iterative function, this average x, which is a way of saying step over a table, which we create through our context. And we're saying for the date we have, take away the number of days we want, and work out the average of those, work out the average of the mean temperature for those. So that's all fine, and I can add that. And now I've got this nice little smooth line, and I might actually, just for the sake of emphasis, just make that a little bit thicker because it's kind of nice to overlay that and see what we're doing. So we can see that we've kind of blended that 30-day average over time, so we can see there is a change, but it's a little more easy to read. And for context, we've got this kind of light gray daily thing in the background that just helps us to contextualize that. If I want to see what that does, I could change that to say 10 days, which is probably going to be a little more jagged. I could change to 60 days, which is going to be maybe smooth enough, but it really depends on our data and what we're doing. And that does the job. But I have to understand this in the context of how my visual is currently being drawn from the model. I have to know about my model. I have to think about all the things I might be doing. And that's kind of a challenge when you're somebody like me who likes to think about the table of data that I have in my visual. So if we were to look in our, you gotta love it. There we go. If I look inside my visual, I can show this as a table. And I can see underneath, I've got this kind of very straightforward data frame. I've got my date and I've got my mean temperature. And this is everything that's currently what I would say is in scope of the visual. This is what Power BI has queried and has sent back to me. And for this context, this row, this date, and also the combination of mean temperature, which isn't the row, but it is an aggregation, this moving average is evaluated in this kind of date context. But it also may consider that I have filters applied to my visual. I might have location or date, or I might have filters explicitly applied in the filter pane. And I have to be aware of these variables. So just because I get a number, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right. But for me, I think much more simply in this way. And this wasn't how we could really think until this year. So with Power BI, it was sort of late end of last year, we had visual calculations come in. They're a feature that are still in preview, but they aim to solve this problem. In terms of how we try and offload to the model, we're now trying to onboard into the data set that we already have available to us. So the Power BI will do that row context and anything else we want to pull into the visual, but we can then focus locally on that data and work on that data as if it doesn't change. So if we think about that as a table in Excel or a raw file, that's the data we have available. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're going to work on. And this is very understandable to me as somebody that thinks in that way. With visual calculations, as I say, they're in preview. They're a feature that, despite being preview, they have been enabled for people to play with. But for those that may have this turned off or may not know about preview features in general, in Power BI's options dialog, you have the option to look under what's known as preview features. And there is an option, there's quite a few of them still. Some of them do make it out. And visual calculations is moving, I believe, towards general availability. The product manager is very keen to keep that going, but visual calculations is here. And we can see it's turned on. And this learn more will take us to that link we just saw. That's the Microsoft documentation that kind of goes over the concepts and explains things probably more succinctly than I'm explaining to you today. But sometimes it's nice to have somebody talk at you. But with that enabled, I have some options in my In my bar, I have this new visual calculation option that is not currently available because I don't have a visual selected. So what we will do is we'll copy paste this visual onto a new page, because I like to I kind of chunk my presentation up. So this is where we're going to start looking at a visual calculation relative to a conventional measure that we just used. So this is our rolling average that we added, and this is some DAX. This is not bad as DAX goes. This is about as far as I'm comfortable with DAX, unless it's building graphical stuff, which I'm a little more comfortable with, but that can get a bit crazy. But we're going to have a think about what this means from a visual calculation perspective. So I will just duplicate this down here. And I'm going to remove this measure from our new visual, just so that we can do a quick comparison and see how things work. And I'll just double check what I left my rolling average at. I left it at 60, so let's put that back down to 30. You gotta love that UI. Okay, so we're now back to kind of how we want it. We want a roughly about a month rolling average of our data, so we can sort of see that there is some variation, but it's largely a trend, and we still have our seasonality. So with a visual calculation, we now, once we click on the visual, we have the ability to enter this dialog. We can apply a calculation directly to a visual. So let's hit that. And we get something very similar to what we saw when we did the show table view. We get a new interface. It's what's known as focus mode in Power BI. It brings a visual up into, it's not quite full screen, but it uses the whole report canvas rather than the visual footprint. And we have this interface here where we have the ability to add a calculation. This is kind of pre-rolled for us in the sense that it assumes we're going to create a calculation. So it's going to give us an arbitrary name and an equal sign, which basically is a declaration to say, this is my new thing that I want to create. What I can do is I can start typing something in here. I could just make that 1 if I wanted and press enter. And that will just evaluate the value of 1 for every row. So this is basically, think of this as a calculated column instead of a measure. It's kind of treated as a measure, but in the context of a visual, it works at a column row level. So everything you do in this formula will kind of propagate in the direction that you specify, if you specify it. But what we can see is I've added something called calculation, which is a very lovely name, but it's added this extra field to the y-axis well right now, and that's called calculation. And if I click back on that, I have the ability to edit this. So if I wanted to call it, say, rolling average, I could just rename that. And what I can then start to think about is how that's actually going to work in the context of my data. So with my data, I now don't need to think about context other than what is in this box here. This is the data that I'm being given. I don't need to know about this stuff because it's not visible. Anything that's in these buckets here is what's being provided to me to work to. I don't know anything outside this. So whilst that feels constraining, and in some cases it can be quite freeing in the sense that when you have to think about something a little more out of the norm, other than simple sums, and sometimes they could be a valuable thing to think of. But for now, in the scope of rolling average or moving average, it can help us a lot because we only have to think about this. We don't have to think about anything else that's in play. It's just what's sent. So in that case, we can start to think about, there are some formulas that have been introduced to make these things easier. So as part of visual calculations, let's bring this window back across again. There are a number of special DAX expressions that have been brought across that do work very well with this. So things like next, previous, running sum, moving average, which sounds kind of useful. Look at with totals, last, first, these kind of what we might think of in the context of a data set, and we want to go up or down or over a certain window of that data. These are the kind of things that lend themselves really nicely to this thought pattern. So with the rolling average or a moving average, we can use that moving average formula. But what we can also do is the team that have built this feature have also added what they call expression templates. So I can click this little fx function, and there's some pre-canned examples that I can use. So for instance, I'm very interested in the concept of a moving average. I can pull that up and I can click on it. And what this does is it puts in a template, and I've got my moving average function, and then a field placeholder and a window size placeholder. So these are parameters that we want to change. And one thing this interface has that the conventional editor doesn't is the ability to pick a field using a tool. So I currently just have mean temperature as a reference, so I can shortcut to that. And then my window size, I want to use 30 days. So that's basically days in this case being my grain of my visual, my date. So 30 could be months. It could be years if you have months or years on your x-axis. So you have to think about 30 is the unit of whatever it is I'm kind of moving over. So at the minute it's date, but it could be something else. But when I apply this change, I now get this this line here. It kind of did the same thing because of my visual settings. So I'll just do. I can't leave it. I'll just bold that up, so we can kind of see that we get the same results. What we're doing is we're working across this data set, and the expression is, we don't have 30 rows here, and this is formatted as 16.8, but it is 16.79. It's gradually learning more as it goes over the first 30 rows. And then as we hit the 30th row, it's going to start sliding 30 rows back across this data set as it goes. And all we really had to do was use a formula like that, which is fairly intuitive to us. And we can say, yeah, a moving average, that's what I want. Instead of something like, I have to back out of this UI to show you because I'm doing too much here, but let's just jump back out. We can see that they look the same. But if I pull that formula back up, then we're already saying the moving average formula is already significantly easier to understand. And that's because we don't have to worry about filter or other context that may exist outside of our visual, which is really, really nice. But we can see very easily we get the same effect. Christian, hello.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. Sorry, I did just have a question. So just to clarify with what you kind of just said, obviously because you've got date in the x-axis, we can use that to do 30-day rolling. But you're saying if you wanted to have like 6 month or something like that, then you need that month component in the x-axis to be able to leverage it. Is that right? It's part of the visual count?
It depends. So I guess what we can do is we can illustrate something here where if I want to go back in, I can right click on my calculation and go edit calculation. And that's going to bring my UI back up. I have to think about it in the context of my data. So I'm using date as my grain.
Yep.
So if I'm thinking purely at this level of detail, I would have to do some, conversion in my head to say, well, if it's 6 monthly, then it's going to be, 365.25 over 2 days. That would be my window. If I need to think at the day level, I would have to do a similar conversion of my window to say it's this many units along the x-axis that I want to slide by. So, I mean, for argument's sake, I'm really struggling at the minute because I'm in multitasking mode. So 365 divided by 2, that's 36, 19, 195. Say 195. So I would change that to say 195. And you could that kind of offsets how I think it might.
You can
grab it kind of lags a little bit because we're pushing it out by up to 6 months ish.
Yeah.
But that's how I would think about it. Now, if I wanted to think about it as months, I do have a do I have one?
A month column, yeah, I can see.
Do I have a year month column? Is that gonna suffice? Let's see what kind of column that is. I think that's just a conventional category. Okay, so I could have, say, an end of month column. Let's just kind of do that in here. No, I can't do that in the UI. Let's just jump back out. So I might do something like, let's say month end. Actually, say month start. No, we'll do month end because it's a little cleaner. Date. So what I'm doing here is I'm just creating a column that groups by month, and that should be 0. What that's going to do is that's going to, for every value of date, it's going to say what the end of the month is. So for the 1st of January, it's going to be the 31st of January. And for the 2nd of January, it's going to be the 31st of January, and so on. But what it does is it changes the grain of our data. So if I add that month end column into my x-axis, and I'll just take that out, I've now got a date, but my unit is different. My grain is different. I've now said, well, it's now monthly. So 31st of January, 28th of February, 31st of March. So 195 months is a really bad idea.
Yeah.
But I could do a month average like that.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
But the problem there is my data is monthly as well.
Yeah,
so it doesn't necessarily make sense to do that. So a 3-month could work.
Yeah.
I'd
yeah,
get some
really
drift.
cool.
Yeah. But this is the challenge. So on one hand, we've given you something, I say we, Microsoft gave you something that lets you think more in the context of your visual, but now you have to think at the context of the grain of the data that you have, because you can't manufacture grain here. This is the row context that is created by you adding columns to your visual. So your x-axis and your y-axis in this case is measures. Measures don't create aggregations. They just, they do. They aggregate, but they don't create row context to give you more data points.
Yeah.
So nor can you roll up data points or project them out. So you kind of have to think within the context of your hierarchy or your column.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really good question actually, because you can do that, but you then have to think, does it lend itself to what I'm trying to do?
So it sounds like it's a new way of thinking about how the calculation will be applied. It kind of, like you said, I liked how you crossed out everything that was in the data pane, because it's like, let's not worry about that. Let's focus on what's in the visual, what we can do, and what we're trying to evaluate, and use those fields to be able to drive the calculation, rather than thinking about everything else that might be going on in the data model and relationships and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So it's a new way of thinking, and one may lend itself better than the other.
Yeah.
But again, it may not. And I have an example in just a moment where we can sort of talk about that.
Yep. Cool.
But this is,
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I didn't mean to stop you too much, and I'll let you get on with it. But there was one other quick question just from Pat in the chat, and he was just asking, and based, I think, on the new end of month x-axis, and then we only have a single date per month now with
Correct.
with the mean temp.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We only have one row per month. So cool. We've reduced the grain of our visual, so our visual can display more data points, but those data points are now at a higher level of detail. Higher level of detail. We've aggregated them to monthly rather than daily. Cool. So again, we have many ways to play, but we still have to think. It's the age-old problem of, you could think about it from a data modeling perspective. It's the same challenge. When you're building a fact table, you've got to think of your grain. Mm-hmm. The grain of your data, it really dictates what you can actually do downstream. So obviously you can, your lowest level of detail dictates how far down you can go. So if you can obviously aggregate upwards if you've got the right dimensions, date, month, year, those things can all aggregate up quite nicely, but you can't make days from months if you don't have the data at a lower level. Mm-hmm. So I kind of got a little soapboxy there, but visuals are the same. With this visual calculation paradigm, you can only operate at this level of detail. So it's very, whilst you can work on this level of detail, you can use conventional DAX statements. I'm not going to do anything like that today just because it's quite out of scope.
Yeah.
But you can start to think about your data in a similar way. Most DAX functions work in here. So even though we've got special functions, you can use the DAX functions, and you can filter and create additional things to work from. But you still ultimately have to evaluate to that row. You can't change how the visual aggregates because that's what you're prescribing here. In my visual, I've said this is how my visual is being grouped. Mm-hmm. And then, if I were to add a legend, which is another grouping, it's not going to let me do it because I've got two measures. But if I were to add in, I guess it's one of the things with Visual Calcs is when you add, it creates a multiple measure in here, which makes the legend unusable for a line chart. But if I were to add a legend in, it would create a different grouping orthogonality. So, and then I've got my grain is one row per location per date.
Mhm.
And then I'd have to start thinking like that. So still a way of applying the thought. It just becomes a case of which one is right for the
Mhm.
situation I'm in.
Yeah, cool. That's
Um,
really good.
yeah. So
Awesome.
it's one of those things. We're giving you a new tool. It is perhaps up to you to determine if it's right for you and if it's something you can leverage. So this is a kind of a simple intro. Um, One of the things we sort of have done here is thought about the concept of rows. Um, but what if we have something like a matrix? So we just literally talked about the concept of adding legend to a line chart, which creates this horizontal vertical orthogonality, direction of data. So here I've got a simple matrix, which I've added my year column to my rows and my month to my column. So I've got kind of a nice, sensible view, left to right, up to down, kind of makes sense chronologically. I can see the mean temperature per month per year. I can obviously slide that out. I'll keep it fairly small, just because matrices can get a little tricky to read when you start packing them with information. But now I've got the concept of how do visual calculations work here. So if we were to think about, let's add a calculation. So I'll just jump into the UI. So we can see that this little box is sort of showing us where things work. If I were to say, let's do, maybe I won't do versus previous. Maybe I'll just do previous, oops, previous mean temperature. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, give me the previous value of mean temperature for this row context or column context. So this is going to evaluate, and what we can sort of see is we can look at either the matrix or the table underneath. This is what our visual is going to look like. So one of the neat features, actually, just while we're here, is let me just zoom in a little bit. I can't annotate whilst zoomed on Teams. It's kind of a weird feature, but if you'll bear with me, you'll see the previous calculation is now there, and we've got these little eye icons next to them. So what that means is, for instance, if we wanted to use this calculation in our visual but didn't want to display it, we could just hide it by clicking here. And what we can see down here in the table or the matrix view of our underlying data is that the calculation exists, but it's actually been hidden from the viewed visual. And if I jump back, it's not visible here at all, but there's this little eye that says some fields are hidden from the visual. Because there's some stuff happening underneath. This is just for the developer to know, because you might come into a report and look at it and go, oh, okay. So if we just jump back in, that might make me a new one, but that's okay. We'll just delete that. So I can show and hide these things. So I can think about them as a staging area too. And that's something we'll talk about in just a moment. But this previous value, so I've got my 16.6, and then if I go across to February, I've got 16.7, but I've got no previous value. So what we can see here is it's kind of not doing anything for this first row, but we've got 16.6, 16.57, which is about 16.6, 17.4, 17.45-ish. So what we can see is it's kind of following down this way, which is fine. If I want to compare my January over the years, it's going down in rows, which is what we saw before. This is kind of the default, what they call axis for calculations. What I could do is let's rename this to, because we know the orthogonality of this, where it's going. Let's call this previous year. So we can now see that it's going in a down direction. But if we wanted to change that and go across, so we wanted to look at the previous month within the current year, we can do that. We can just simply start typing. So I might call this previous month, and I might say equals previous mean temperature. But what you can see is the expression actually has additional options. So we can see that one of these is called axis, and axis is the concept of which way are we going across, or are we going down, are we going rows, or are we going columns. So I can add a couple of blanks in to use the defaults, and then what we see now is we've got options here: columns, columns, rows, 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 columns. So by default, it's going down in rows. And there's a little icon that sort of dictates the kind of reading order, as it were, or calculation order. So columns is, we can see it going right. Column rows kind of goes right and down in what we might call Z order. Rows goes down, and rows columns goes down and back up. So you can start thinking about which way do I need to move over my data to evaluate. So if you're thinking about like a running total or something like that, how does that running total work? This is how you would start to specify that. So in this one, I'm going to zoom out first because I can't interact. I'm going to change that to columns and save that calculation. And let's just hide previous year for now. So what we can see is our previous month is blank because in the context of this visual, and this is one thing you've got to bear in mind, it doesn't know about December 2011. But it also doesn't know in this row about December 2012 because it's within the row. So we might want to think about, is that the right orthogonality? For the minute, we'll just keep it simple. We might want to think about rows columns or columns rows. But we can start to see that our previous month for February now uses January's value, and March uses February's value, and so on. So we can go across the visual instead of down. And just because why not? Let's try previous continuous. So we'll take the mean temperature and we'll try and use the columns rows approach. What we'll do is we'll go across and down. And we'll actually put that in the right place. So now we have a 16.97 previous continuous. Is that right? We'll have to find out. 17.0, which is, it's probably about right. Maybe it's going to help if we give 2 decimal places for the original measure. So let's look at mean temperature, specific column. Should have really thought about the decimal places. Let's have a look. 17.45. So we're now getting 16.97. And that's 16.97. So that's being carried down to here. It's kind of handy having 2 tables. It stops me scrolling. So you can allow it to continue over rows, but you do have to think about that. It's not just enough to say calculate across rows or across columns. You have to think about the row or column and or combination that you're in. So this is sort of quite an interesting idea, but it's still simple. You still only have to think about this formula, previous. What does previous mean? It means go up, next goes down, first and last, first and last. We'll have a look at first and last now, and we can use the concept called reset to help us to illustrate that. So our matrix is quite simple. What if we've got a hierarchy? So now what we've got is we've got a matrix. Instead of having, we could have probably used the table, but the matrix illustrates it quite nicely. We've got a hierarchy of year and month. So, we can roll up our table and drill it down. And we've got years running down and months following. So we can see 2012, 2013, but within here, we can see each month has its own mean temperature. So let's add some calcs and see what we can do. So I want to illustrate the concept of what happens with hierarchies, because we now have the concept of an additional, this degree of orthogonality is not across or down. It's kind of up or down in terms of further away or towards you, if that makes sense. It's an extra dimension that isn't, it's third dimension, not 2-dimension in this concept. So we've got the concept of first and last values. So let's add in first. We'll just call it first because we're imaginative people. So we'll add the first mean temperature value and we'll hit enter. And what this is doing, and I will not repeat, actually, I'm just going to change the mean temperature to be 2 decimal places. Let's just do it in the right place. There we go. We can see the first is 16.57, but this is repeated all the way down. And the first total is 12.21. So this is kind of evaluating at the total level. But at the second level, it's 16.57. Let's just drill this up. So we can see that 12.21 is the first aggregate of our year, and this is repeated all the way down as well. So this is kind of working out. It sort of resets at each level of the hierarchy, but it doesn't reset the inner values in this case. What it's actually doing is it's saying at that level, this is the first value. It doesn't matter what the upper level is. And it's kind of doing that at the year level too. It's just ignoring, it's just going, yeah, at this level, this is the first value. And likewise, last is kind of the same. Oops. Talking and typing is hard. So 13.43 is our last value. And we can see that that's kind of copied across into here. And if we expand that out, we get 16.9, which, as we can see, is probably going to be all the way down here. There it is. So this is a way of us thinking about the frame of our data, but that we can introduce a concept. So let's just say we actually wanted to get the last value per group. And that's where we can think about the reset concept coming in. So if we wanted to introduce the concept of first by year, we could say, do the same kind of thing, actually do the formula. This is what happens when you name your colors the same as functions, by the way. Don't do that. We will say the first mean temperature, but now we can use these parameters. We've still got access, and we've got the concept of ordering as well if we want to do things like running totals, how we treat blank values. But reset is how do we, when do we want to reset? So what we actually want to do is say when we find a new value of year, we want to start again. So we can choose the year column, which is in our data set. So, bearing in mind that, I think it's probably established by now, but we only saw fields that were in our data set. And these are calculations that we've made. So it means that we can refer to previous calculations, but we can't see anything in the model. I don't want to do the X again, but it's only the stuff we've added to this visual that we can access. But by now saying for a new value of year, we're going to reset. The first value is 16.57, which is correct. But then when we hit the new year, 2013, it's 17.45, which it is for here, and so on and so forth. So you can actually start to think about partitioning your data based on your hierarchy. So for instance, if you want to do a percent of total by year, you could start to think about how you might sum up by year and work that out. So it doesn't work well with temperature because it's kind of a non-additive measure. But you've got the ability to then think, actually, how do I prescribe where my calculations start to, partition themselves, which is quite neat. And likewise, we could do last by year. And we'll use the same thing and just add in the necessary reset. And we can see similar thing. The last is 12.21. Did I do that wrong? That seems off. Oh no, there we go. I'm thinking about the hierarchy again. 16.97, 16.97, 16.46, 16.46. So again, I can sort of look up or down, forwards or backwards, start and window over it with things like my moving average, and start to think within this data set, this frame, which is quite neat. I'm conscious of time. I think I'm going to do one more demo just to sort of show how it could be applied to something a little more fun than a matrix. The matrices are fun, but something that's a little more visual. So this is the idea about your model context versus your visual context. So what I've been quite interested in is how temperature data compares to a baseline. So I've seen a lot of data from NASA where they take the 1951 to 1980 mean temperature, and then they look at mean temperature against that. So for instance, if I look back in time to the 1800s, 1900s, how might that look versus say today, based on this mean that I took across 30 odd years. So in my date slices here, I'm looking between 2012 and 2022, and I want that average despite the fact that I only have this date range. And this is where a DAX measure is really handy. So down here, I have a table, and this table is not affected by this filter. So just to sort of show you, if I go to edit interactions and I click on this slicer, you can see that we've got two tables. The one on the left it says no, don't slice me. And the one on the right is being affected. So my date range slicer here, if I start to mess with this, then I can change my values, but I can see that I always see from 1951 to 1980, just so I can verify that 12.10 mean to make sure that's being evaluated correctly. So that measure is just, I'm just saying, make sure that I don't include blanks, because some places in New Zealand don't have data between them. So we only want to use the mean that exists for the data we have. But calculate that mean temperature across every date that we have, where the date's between 1951 and 1980, where the year is between 1951 and 1980. So for the data we have, try and work that out. So if I go to, say, Auckland, where we only had data from 1966, I can see I have no data for this range, but if I let it out, my mean is still 15 point. Let's make that 2 decimal places. Should have learned my lesson. Numbers are important to compare properly. So you can see this 15.05 that's evaluated is correct for every row. It doesn't matter that we're only filtering to this day, but it does mean that we've got a solid frame of reference using a DAX measure, which is exactly what DAX measures are great at doing. But we now want to do something with a visual that can use both the concept of a visual calculation and a measure like this that actually forms a reference for the stuff that falls outside what we might be seeing. So on a new page, see how much we can get done with this. What we're going to do is, this is another thing you can do with visual calculations, actually, just to sort of show you how neat they can be. Let's add a bar chart. So I'm going to do something very similar to the climate stripes concept, where I'm going to use this reference to work out how hot or cold a month is based on mean temperature based on this baseline. And let's let all that out, because these slices are synced across the workbook. So I'm going to add in my year. So just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to add in years as my grain. And I'm going to put my mean temperature in. So this is a regular old bar chart. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add in my reference. So normally with a bar chart, what you add is what you see. But if we then think about the concept of a visual calculation, I want to add a new calculation that's specifically for this purpose. So I'm just going to call this versus reference. And I'm going to say mean temperature minus my reference temperature. So this is the difference between what I'm getting for this month versus what I took as a mean across the time, the period. So let's just press enter on that. And what I now get is a difference. And my bar chart is happily adding these as series, which isn't great. It's not what I would like. It's too noisy. But what I can do now is I needed this to calculate this, but I don't need to see this. So I can hide this using the hide from visual option, and that takes out the first one. And then the second one, I don't really need either. I just want to see my bar chart. But what I can do is I can think about what I want to do with this. And with bars, we can conditionally format our colors based on a rule. So I can go in here and I want to put a gradient on this chart. I want my bars to be shaded based on the temperature range. So I can say, yeah, I want to use a gradient. And what can I base this on? Well, now I have the data in this visual available. Even though it's hidden, I still have it available to choose. I can still go to the model, but I can choose this versus reference column that I just created. And I can set the lowest value to, say, let's make it a blue. And the highest value to, red's not great. Let's use orange. So I've got this nice gradient, but also because, I want to show deviation. I'm going to add a middle color, and I'm going to make that white. but at the same time, I'm going to make that a custom value of 0. So what that means is if it gets, between 0 and minus the negative maximum, it's blue to white, and then it's white to orange based from 0 upwards. And because I've based it on this field, it's going to evaluate across that calculated field. And if I click OK, I now get something that looks kind of very climate stripesy. But I also have an extra encoding in my bar height. But what's not so great is my some of my bars, because I've got probably a 0 here. That's not great. So I might just add a border around it just to help me see what's what. And I might just reduce the spacing so that I've got something that's a little more like climate stripes. So what I can see here is based on that baseline that I saw, and I could add that to I could put a constant line on for that, for instance. So let's just call that my reference and put that in value, base that on the mean temperature reference. And I get my reference line, and I'll maybe just pop a label on that. So I can see that, based on my reference, which is 15.05, the months that are above are more red, and the ones that below are more blue, but I can also see the degree of how they varied against that reference in the legend. And I can now sort of move that around, and my color scale stays pretty much the same because that's being worked out against the data set. And I can click around and start to see my, Dunedin's a good one because it goes back a bit further, but I can see that my newer months, depressingly, are warmer. But this is kind of a nice way of combining the power of all DAX to show you how you might be able to start thinking visually. I'm very, very conscious of time. I think I may just pause there for a sec. Did I see a hand up?
No, that was me accidentally
okay.
raising a hand rather than reacting with a clap. So
that's
very cool.
Like, hey.
No, I really like that. That was a great sort of representation of the climate stripes sort of concept and how you can present it in a column chart. So no, that's fantastic. Are there any questions from anyone on the call in terms of the demos that Daniel has gone through? And I love the fact that, Matt, you did it in like a logical order, stepping through and building things up and then showing sort of different features you can leverage. I was going to ask, can we use these Visual Calcs as conditional formatting? You've just sort of answered that one really nicely. So yeah, are there any questions from the group with what Daniel's been presenting for us? You're getting lots of positive statements and a few nice reactions and things, Daniel. So, but yeah, like, was there anything else that you did want to say in terms of closing out? Oh, there is a general question from Rose. Rose, feel free to come off mute if you want to ask Daniel directly. Otherwise, type it in the chat. It's up to you.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, perfect.
Great. I just wanted to, I haven't used Power BI for a little while, for probably about 2-3 years. I just wondered if you don't have to go through, I'm not expecting you to go through every single change, but I was just wondering if there was kind of any overarching sort of changes that you've noticed in the last 2-3 years that, that is kind of significant. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, sometimes month to month it doesn't feel like a lot moves, but then if it's been a couple of years, there are quite a few things that have come out. Really, I mean, visual calculations we're talking about are a big change. They're still in preview, but they're very, very robust. Field parameters. Yeah, Liz has read my mind. Field parameters are the ability. I wouldn't be able to quickly demo them now, but the ability to slice by different columns or measures instead of values. So think about a bar chart where you might want to swap out month and year interchangeably. That's quite neat. So before you might have used bookmarks for that. That's quite a neat feature. That's very, very powerful feature, actually. Trying to think off the top of my head. We've had a few changes to the core visuals. We've got the new card, the new slicer. There's got to be a load. It's always fun being put on the spot. You read the release notes every month, and then you're like, what has actually changed? I think honestly, probably the easiest way is if you have a few minutes, hop to the blog and just quickly digest the monthly change logs because they're quite succinct. And it helps you build a picture because as well, we see improvements to features that have been introduced as well. So, but I think in terms of, I guess, modeling, it depends what your area is really. If where you're interested in Power BI, if it's all of it, that's harder to answer.
Yeah. Okay.
But
No, that's great.
these
Thank
are good
you.
features that really help a lot with some of the conventional problems we used to have with modeling or visual design.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. But it's a good question. It made me really think.
Yeah, and also then is a good point. Like just new updates to different visuals, things coming out of preview. Like I think some of the big ones, like field parameters, Visual Calcs, these things that have been mentioned. There's also deprecation of other visuals as well. Like gotta be careful. Like Bing Maps is now gone or going, and all these sorts of things. So
I think developer changes are big as well. So we've now got 2 additional panes inside Power BI. One for being able to run DAX queries and evaluate them, which is quite handy. But you can use that to create measures and things like that. And also what we call TMDL, which is a new definition format for building reports. So think scripting and storing reports in a non-binary format. And then we've got a new report format that's in preview as well. So again, I don't know if you've had the problem of putting reports in source control or something like that. That's quite hard. But these are kind of democratizing the ability to make reports easier to version control and collaborate on as a team. So these are kind of not highly visible front end changes, but very powerful changes for report developers and teams.
Right. Thank you.
So PBI, PE, PBIR, Tim, all these new kind of initialisms coming out. There's quite a few, but they're all about breaking down the old report format into something that is easier to get into and understand. And I think Fernando has a hand up.
Yes, thank you. Go on, Rose, please.
No, that's okay. Go on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. To be honest, I have not used visual calculations, but I wanted to mention that one very important characteristic is that they belong to the model, to the visual, not to the model.
Absolutely.
And then,
sorry, go on.
No, you.
I was going to say that's exactly, it was on my list of things to do, but I got a little bit excited about the other stuff. But I think that's probably one of the most important features to think about is visual calculations also are very, very specific to the visual that you're working on. So measures in the model are great for reuse. If you want to use them across multiple visuals, they're a great place to centralize that logic. Visual calculations, as Fernando was saying, I would recommend that think about them. Does it only make sense for the visual I'm using? Then it's probably a good candidate for a visual calculation. If I want to reuse it, then, that's another new feature that we just had out, DAX UDFs, user-defined functions that are in preview. So that's another new thing to add to Liz's list. The ability to centralize DAX logic in a place that's not necessarily a measure to allow you to reuse things. And I think UDFs can be used in Visual Calcs, if I remember correctly. We didn't touch that today. But totally scoped to visual means scoped to visual. So you can't build that like that thing we did in the bar chart. If you want to use that somewhere else, you've got to do it again in another visual. If you want to do it in multiple places, put it in the model and be very clear about what its intent is. Because it may not make sense for your average pivot table or something like that. That's one of the downsides to centralizing measures is they have to kind of make sense, but also it kind of makes them easier to reuse. So it's always a big trade-off.
And it's a bit of a follow-on question, Daniel. I think so. To discover visual calculations, you don't get it in your data pane because it's not in the model. You have to click on a particular visual to see if there are visual calcs within there. Is that correct?
I believe so. I haven't seen any of the visual indicators that just exist on the canvas. If you go to a page, there's nothing that says, hey, there are calcs here. I'll just double check off screen. I never remember seeing those. No, there's nothing in the visual header. There's nothing. It's when you click on the visual, that little eye that we saw is is the sort of restatement that, hey, there might be some stuff under the surface here.
Mhm.
Obviously, with things like the report format changes we talked about, they're easier to search. So if
Yep.
you've got a tool that, you can search these JSON and YAML files that are produced, which are plain text, rather than binary, then you could find those things out through other means too. So if you've got tools that scan reports or something like that, you could do that.
Yeah, good point. It's a bit, yeah,
And then,
a bit like the edit interaction. It's a bit.
Oh,
yes,
yes.
I have another couple of comments.
Yeah, sorry,
Yes,
Fernando,
Fernando.
you go.
The Pareto chart is another example that it's great working with visual calculations, because the DAX for that is another topic, no? And
Yes.
with this, it's just ease.
Yep, exactly. Just when you have to start thinking about scoping to the visual, the Pareto chart's a perfect example. 80-20 rule. Yeah, very, very hard. I don't have any examples on hand, but I would say generally, if you want to see some more, I did some okay stuff, but there are some people doing some really cool stuff. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, anything with the PBI core visuals tag. And I think is it 30 days of visual calculations on LinkedIn is a hashtag as well. I know that Eric Svensson's using that. He's prolific with
Yes.
visual calculations, where he's basically blogging all the cool stuff he's doing with them. He's not the only one, but he just springs to mind off the top of my head.
Right. And then these are just two personal comments, because I just used at work the violin plot, and everybody was really shocked and with the wow effect.
Oh, I was good.
Because
the
we
good kind of
have
shocked.
100 machines in one manufacturing process, and I wanted to show by machine group or by calendar week, or if you select one product that uses 10 machines during a period of time, all their summary statistics, and that worked wonderful. And the other
Fantastic.
point, last one, is that I've never used the NEF before this week. And then we have a laboratory measuring weight 90 times per day for one article, for example, no? And for other articles. But in one day, they can measure 90 times one article. And then how can I plot it in Power BI? I can't, because I need to aggregate. I need to sum, average, min, max, or whatever. And then using the NEF. And that worked magic.
That's such good feedback. Thank you on both of those things.
No, thank you.
It's a very, very common case for Deneb. I'm actually working on a project at the minute where we're doing exactly the same thing. We've got a lot of data points, a lot of high cardinality, and trying to visualize them in a way that makes sense is challenging. And the violin plot, it's very close to my heart. I haven't given it a lot of attention in the last couple of years, and I have another one that I've been working on whenever I get a chance, and I don't think it'll ever come out, which is a shame, but it can do even more data points even faster, and maybe one day I'll get to do it. But that's the coolest thing. I'm so glad that these visuals are useful. I build them to help me, and I'm in sharing them, I hope they help others. So thank you. That's amazing feedback.
Thank you. And then I have a comment like the devil's advocate. What will happen when you stop maintaining the NEP or the violin plot?
I mean, I suppose you could argue I haven't maintained the violin plot for a couple of years. I'm glad that it's remained stable.
They still work.
I have no plans to stop at the moment. I hope there is enough of a community where if that ever happens, the code is open source, and people. It is, yeah. All the code is open. All of my visuals are free and open source. So
excellent.
In the absolute worst case, if I did get hit by a lottery bus, somebody else may be able to take it on. But I would always be open to anyone that wants to contribute or be in a kind of contingency capacity. I do speak to people from time to time who get to know the code base and may be able to do it. we need to have a think about that. But at the minute, no, there's no. I guess there's no succession planning in place.
No,
but I'm
great,
busy
thank you.
with
Because
it.
someone mentioned that they were not open source, and I believed him. So that's not true. Excellent.
No, they are. They're open. Deneb is open source. I'm doing a big update at the minute. So I think, did I see a question about where that's going? That's probably a whole other conversation.
Sorry, Daniel. I'll just wrap up
Yeah,
for everyone, and then
that's a good idea.
We can keep chatting just afterwards. Just to close it off, and I'd stop the recording, and then we can continue chatting. But look, a few people have jumped off. Thank you everyone for dialing in. Hope you enjoyed it. I learned a fair bit, and Daniel, thank you so much for the demonstration. Again, stepping through logical sort of way, and I quite like, if you're still on, I quite like that question because it made everyone on the call go back 3 years plus in time and think, what are the big updates and what other cool things? So yeah, there's definitely lots to explore. For those people, yeah, if you did want the blog, YouTube channel, you can have a look at it there if you want to refer back to some of the things that Daniel spoke about or any of our previous sessions. Feel free to go and have a look. We'll be opening back the forum back up probably from like February, March, where Alice and I are expecting our third child in January, so things are just a bit chaotic coming up over the next 6 months or so. But we'll continue having these sessions and yeah, being able to share. But if you are interested in presenting, beginner level or like anything more advanced, feel free to get in touch. And I guess, yeah, most importantly, as some people have already mentioned in the chat, have a really safe, fantastic break over the Christmas and New Year's period. And thanks again for all your support and regular dialing in and the familiar faces that we've seen again over the course of it. It is the community that we do all have as Power BI developers and people that are working with these range of tools is really, really special. And so, yeah, if we can continue this forum really focused on more of the environmental side of things where we can, I think it's a really special group. So thanks everyone for dialing in. And without further ado, that is it. So I'll stop sharing. I'll stop the recording. And for anyone that is keen to continue to have a bit of a conversation with Daniel and with myself or just with anyone else,